Hey guys, and welcome back to another video, and today we're back with another True Crime Tuesday video. But before I get into today's video, I just want to do the usual. So if you're new here, my name's Amber and I upload fashion, lifestyle and beauty content, and I now have a new series where I like to combine my interest in true crime with my love for makeup. I combine the two together. I basically sit and chat about a true crime case while doing my makeup. I just want to put it out there that I was not the first to invent this. I was actually really inspired by an American YouTuber called Bailey. She's absolutely incredible, and I believe she invented the idea over on her channel, so I just wanted to take inspiration from her and put my own spin on things. So today's case, I just want to do a quick disclaimer and just a little warning: it does contain adult references, so if that makes you feel uncomfortable in anyway, then please feel free to click off this video, and there are plenty of other videos that you can go and watch over on my channel. So today's case is actually about the death of Jonbenet Ramsey, and for you guys that don't know, I think most people do know about Jonbenet because it was such a big case and it was such a sad case. So Jonbenet Ramsey was actually a little 6-year-old girl who was murdered on Boxing Day. She was found dead in her parents' basement. The case actually remains unsolved to this day, and there's a lot of question marks. But anyway, I'm just going to get right in. I'm going to start by just explaining a little bit about Jonbenet, and then we're going to get into the events of what actually happened on the night she was murdered. So Jonbenet Patricia Ramsey was born on August 6, 1990 in Atlanta, Georgia. She was an American child beauty queen who was killed at the age of 6 in her family's home in Boulder, Colorado. Jonbenet was the youngest child of Patricia and John Ramsey, her parents, and she had a brother named Burke. Her first name combines her father's first name and middle name, and then her mother's first name was used as her middle name. Her father, Jonbenet Ramsey, was a very wealthy businessman. He was the president of a company called Access Graphics, a computer system company that later became a subsidiary of Lockheed Martin. The family were known for being very wealthy. In fact, he was a millionaire, so they did have a lot of money. Her mother, Patricia, was an American beauty pageant winner who won the Miss West Virginia pageant at age 20 in 1977. Over the years, Patricia entered Jonbenet in lots of different beauty pageants that were held in Boulder, and Jonbenet actually went on to win a fair few titles. She actually won America's Royal Miss, Little Miss Chalvo, Little Miss Colorado, Colorado State All-Star Kids Cover Girl, and National Tiny Miss Beauty. I mean, as you'll have seen by the pictures, this little girl was absolutely adorable. She was gorgeous, and it's just devastating to think she was murdered. So in the early hours of the morning on December 26th, 1996, John and Patricia Ramsey awoke to find their daughter was gone. Jonbenet was missing from her bed in their home at Boulder, Colorado. Patsy and John had actually awoken early because they were getting ready to prepare for a trip. While they were getting ready, Patricia actually noticed a ransom note on they had like a spiral staircase in their house. So she noticed this ransom note, and it's demanding for £118,000 for their daughter's safe return. So despite the note insisting that the family not involve the police, Patsy immediately picks up the phone and calls the police to inform them what's sort of going on. So after she'd finished on the phone call to the police, she informs the friends and family, and all the friends and family come round, trampling all over the crime scene, might I add, to help her look for her daughter. Police arrived about 5:55 AM, so fairly early in the morning, and they found no signs of forced entry, which was really bizarre, but they did not search the basement of the house where the body would eventually be found. Because the police at first believed it was a kidnapping, they didn't do a house search immediately. They didn't start to search the house straight away because they thought that they obviously assumed she wouldn't be on the premises because this note had stated she'd been kidnapped. So the last place you would expect her to find her would be in the house of the place that she'd been kidnapped from. So before Jonbenet's body was found, there was a lot of mistakes made in the investigation. The investigation was very messy, and there was lots of things that happened that in the end probably ultimately damaged a lot of evidence and didn't really help the case. The only place in the house that was actually cordoned off was Jonbenet's bedroom. The rest of the house was free for friends and family to roam. They could have been going around the house, potentially picking up things and destroying evidence. Not intentionally, just obviously they were in a panic and a rush to find their friend's daughter or their family member. So the last thing you're thinking about is moving things around. You're just frantically searching for clues. The other issue was that the police actually shared evidence with the parents, which obviously, because it was thought to be a kidnapping, started to share evidence with the couple because they were trying to, you know, they would like dig in to see if they could find, you know, who's kidnapped your daughter, who would kidnap your daughter, and obviously this probably wasn't the best idea. They also delayed in conducting their informal interviews with the parents, and I believe that they never interviewed the parents alone, they only even interviewed them as a couple, and it was quite a delayed process, which again, it gives, I'm not saying they're involved, but it gives people a chance to come up with stories and ideas on what to say before their interview, where if you're interviewed on the spot there and then, you don't have time to think. Then at 1 PM, the detectives instructed the husband, John Ramsey, and a friend to go around the house and to see if anything was amiss. It strikes me as so odd that this whole time, so the police were there from 6 AM until 1 PM, and this whole time no one had discovered the body when the body was in the basement. It was just strange, very, very strange. Like, for me, if my daughter's, like, I know they're expecting it to be a kidnapping, but wouldn't you search high and low in the full house? It's several hours later and the house still hasn't been searched, which I just find is absolutely bizarre. The other thing that was interesting, the police actually said start at the top and work your way down to the bottom and like conduct a thorough search of each floor, and then we'll go all the way down the house. But the first place that Ramsay went to was the basement, and it's always suspected that I was watching the investigation about this, like they reopened it well, it's never been closed, but they reinvestigated it quite recently, and it was quite interesting because they said that you tend to find a lot of perpetrators. It's interesting that he went straight to the body with the family friend out of all the places in the house, like it was like he knew the body was there, and because he had a witness there to see his distress, it works well in his favour if he is the perpetrator, and perpetrators do often manipulate situations like that to make them not look like a suspect, if that makes sense. So then John Ramsey decides that, I mean, I don't know how I would react in that situation. I would probably want to cuddle my daughter if I found her like that, but he decides that he's going to pick her up and carry her upstairs. But obviously in doing this, he destroyed a lot of potential evidence that was surrounding the body, and it disturbed the crime scene. So not only have you got the full house has been disturbed, but the actual crime scene has been disturbed as well, which is a pain in the ass for investigators. So during the autopsy, it was originally believed that Jonbenet had died from asphyxiation due to strangulation, in addition to a skull fracture. When they later were doing this reinvestigation, they figured out that she'd actually died due to the blunt force trauma to her skull, and this trauma, they could tell that she'd been struck before she'd been strangled, and the way she'd been struck, the damage that it'd done to her skull, suggested that she was already brain dead when she was strangled. So she might have been alive, but she was technically brain dead, if that makes sense. There was sort of no going back from there. So it almost looked like the strangulation was to cover up the trauma to the head, which was a bit strange. Her mouth had been covered in duct tape, her wrists, neck were wrapped with a white cord, and her torso had been covered with a white blanket. So when her father discovered her and carried her upstairs, she was actually wrapped in a white blanket. There was no conclusive evidence and no semen was found on the body, and her vagina appeared to have been wiped clean. Although they did think that a sexual assault had occurred. I think evidence suggested that there was a sexual motive possibly, and that she had been sexually assaulted. So DNA that belonged to a single unidentified man was found on her long johns and her underwear. The makeshift garret, or however you pronounce that word, and that was used to strangle Jonbenet, was actually made with a length of cord and a part of a paintbrush from the basement, and the paintbrush was actually part of her mother Patricia's hobby kit. And the coroner also found what he believed was pineapple in Jonbenet's stomach. So even though they found this pineapple in her stomach, her parents did not remember giving her any of that night. There were also 2 sets of unidentified footprints at the scene, as well as a rope found near Jonbenet's bedroom that did not belong to her family. And as of 2006, it had not been tested. If somebody broke into the house, they did so cleanly. There were no footprints in the snout side, the house, or any signs of forced entry. And then another interesting thing to point out, that when I did watch this documentary, one of the police officers at the time was maintaining this intruder theory, because there's two theories. There's basically suspicion of the family and suspicion of an intruder. And this intruder theory, they had like windows in the basement that you could possibly get into, and one of the windows was broken, although that was broken months previous because Jonbenet had forgot his keys and he couldn't get in, so he basically used that way to get in to the house. But what they did notice was, on the crime scene photos, in the corner of this window there was a big spider's nest that was undisturbed. Every time they did tests, because this was supposedly the way the intruder got in and out of the house, every time they did tests, without fail, they completely wiped out that spider's nest and completely disrupted all of the leaves and all of that sort of stuff around the area. They just thought it was highly unlikely that the intruder had come in and out of that window. It seemed that that was the only place that an intruder could get in and out of, so I just thought that was quite interesting to point out. The ransom note requested $118,000 in exchange for Jonbenet. The exchange was to take place the next day, on December 27th, between 8 and 10 AM. But there was a lot of odd ransom note. A lot of things just didn't add up. Firstly, the letter was signed SBTC, initials that still to this day remain a mystery. They've never ever figured out what those initials stand for. Secondly, bearing in mind this man was a millionaire, the amount of money requested was just an odd amount. 118,000 is so specific. It's just a strange request, and officers thought so too. The 118,000 was very close to John's bonus that year, which suggested that if this ransom note was real, it had to be someone close to the family, because who else would know that his bonus was round about 118,000, which is really strange. So the third and most chilling thing about the whole ransom note was that it was actually written on a pen and paper found inside the house. And this ransom note, by the way, is 2 pages long, and when they investigated it again years later, the quickest time they could write this letter out was in 20 minutes. What kidnapper, or even someone who's just murdered a child, is going to then spend 20 minutes inside a house, possibly getting caught, writing a ransom note? Sounds suspicious to me. So it brought a lot of suspicion to the integrity of the note. They began to believe that this note had been falsified. How was it written on pen and paper from in the house? I don't know. It was just very strange. And obviously, you know, if it was an inside job, you can easily say, well, of course my fingerprints are on that pen and paper, it's my pen and paper. It suggested that somehow the killer had entered the house, wrote the note inside of the house, and then for some reason killed Jonbenet after writing a 20-minute ransom note. All of this occurring while, sorry, I shouldn't laugh, it's not funny. It's just funny as in the sense of you just couldn't write it. Do you know what I mean? You really couldn't. All of this occurring while the other Ramsey family members were inside the house. Another strange thing was that when they actually took the pad from the house to analyse it, this wasn't the first note. There was a practice note written, and they could tell that from on the pad, which was just bizarre. And there was spelling errors on words thought to be easy, like possession, yet words such as attaché were spelled correctly. Some believe that it added to the letter being a hoax, and with the lack of evidence of an intruder, the case became more puzzling. It was just bizarre. And there was also, the family were very big into movies, and there was lots of big movie posters all around the house. And years later, when they reanalysed this letter, there was actual sentences in this note that were movie references. So there was 2 quotes taken from movies within this letter. One was from Dirty Harry, a ransom note written in Dirty Harry, and the other was from the film Speed. And another thing that was just absolutely strange was, in the beginning of the note they'd mentioned this foreign faction. Whoever had wrote it had spelled the word business wrong, as if they were trying to imply that they weren't English, but then the rest of the letter was written as if English was their first language. It was just, nothing really added up with this note. It was truly bizarre. So like I sort of touched on earlier, there are two popular theories that surround this case. So there's the family theory and the intruder theory. The initial investigation focused heavily on the Ramsey family for many reasons. The police felt like the ransom note was staged, as it was unusually long and written using a pen and paper from the Ramsey's house, and it demanded almost exactly the amount of money that John had received as a bonus earlier that year. Additionally, the Ramseys were actually very reluctant in the beginning to cooperate with the police, which is just absolutely bizarre. I would want to do anything I possibly can to find my daughter's killer. I just don't understand why you wouldn't want to cooperate. They later went on to say that they figured the police would conduct a full investigation, and they feared that they would target them as easy suspects, which I just think is a bizarre thing to say as well. Like, why would you come out with that? I just think, yeah, it was just strange. So all three of the immediate family were questioned, and they were asked to submit handwriting samples to compare to the ransom note. Both John and Burke were cleared without any suspicion of writing the note. Their handwriting clearly just didn't match. Whereas Patricia was actually, she couldn't be cleared because they couldn't clear her handwriting sample. So her handwriting sample come back as inconclusive, which is very strange. Despite a large pool of suspects, the media did really focus on Jonbenet's parents, and they spent years under harsh limelight of the public eye. And then in 1999, a Colorado grand jury voted to indict the Ramsey family on child endangerment and obstruction of a murder investigation. However, the prosecutor felt the evidence did not meet beyond a reasonable doubt standard and declined to prosecute. Jonbenet's parents were never officially named as suspects in the murder, and the entire family was exonerated due to the fact the DNA did not match the crime scene. It's all very mysterious, this one. It is very interesting and very mysterious. I'm just going to go on to discuss the suspects in the case and give you the theories behind these suspects. So to start with, I'm going to look at the family, and I'm going to start by chatting about Patricia Ramsey, Jonbenet's mother, and discuss maybe her involvement or why she may have been involved in the murder of her daughter. Just to quickly mention, Jonbenet's mother did actually pass away from ovarian cancer. When she passed away from her 13-year battle with ovarian cancer, took whatever secret she had with her to the grave. So although the couple were exonerated in 2008, there's a lot of people who are still very suspicious of the couple. There's many still suspect that the former Miss West Virginia, Patsy Ramsey, murdered her own daughter. They think that she accidentally murdered her daughter in a fit of rage due to a bedwetting incident and then covered it up in haste. Jonbenet was a known bedwetter, and I think she'd woken mum up quite a lot of times due to bedwetting, and a lot of people think she maybe just got pissed off and this fit of rage just went a little bit too far. So if you were an outsider looking in on the family, she was known as like a pleasant, influential suburban mother of two. She was known for beauty pageant winning, and she used to throw big like Christmas parties every year. But there is several pieces of the evidence that suggest she may have had more to do with the crime than what she let on. So first, it's been speculated that while cleaning up yet another one of Jonbenet's bedwetting incidents, she flipped a switch and slammed her little daughter's head into a blunt surface, a hard blunt surface, something like maybe a bathtub. And secondly, Jonbenet was found with a garrote that was fashioned out of a paintbrush from Patsy's hobby making kit. It's very interesting. And thirdly, the most bizarre ransom note in the history of bizarre ransom notes was that Patsy said she discovered a 2.5-page ransom note on one of the rungs down the spiral staircase that led to the basement where Jonbenet's body was found, written in strange verbiage that seemed lifted from classic crime films, which some of it actually went on to, it was discovered that some of it was lifted from crime films. The note demanded £118,000 be given to a foreign satisfaction by 10 AM the next day. Like I mentioned on a couple of occurrences previously, this £118,000 ransom was the same amount of money as John Ramsey's Christmas bonus from his company Access Graphics. Some sources, including Boulder PD's former co-leading investigator Steve Thomas, have speculated that Patsy wrote the note herself in a moment of panic after realising what she'd done to Jonbenet, but the handwriting analysis did prove to be inconclusive, but it was determined that the pen and piece of paper were taken from a piece of Patsy's own stationery from inside the house. Very suspicious. So then I'm just going to move along to chatting about the father, John Ramsey, because some people also suspect him. So police arrived at the crime scene the morning after Christmas Day to find no footsteps in the snow or sign of a possible intruder. Linda Arndt, the first police officer to arrive on the scene this morning, looked around the house to no avail. Eventually she sent John Ramsey and his neighbour Fleet White to search the house for anything unusual. John made a beeline straight for the cellar where Jonbenet's body was found. He immediately found his deceased child, and though he'd been told to leave everything where he found it, he picked her up, carried her body upstairs. He removed the piece of tape from the child's mouth and placed her down. He even covered her up with a throw blanket, further destroying vital physical evidence. That doesn't scream cover up, I don't know what does. Then Linda, the officer, began to feel like maybe he knew a little bit too much, and she's made no secret her suspicions of the family over the years. Some people obviously suggested that the unseen body was due to a botched police investigation, and some believe it's a strange intuition that led him straight to where his daughter's body was. You know, that part of the home wasn't particularly well used. Why would the first place you would go to look for your daughter be a part of the home that you don't really enter into? It was just a bit strange. She also told ABC News in 1999 that there was other things that the family did that she found really suspicious, like how John and Patsy let the 10 AM deadline in the ransom note slip by without a word. Like, I'd be like, oh my god, we need to get this money together, like my daughters, what's going to happen, oh my god, oh my god. This was before they found the body, and they didn't even say anything when that passed, which I found strange. She also described kneeling beside Jonbenet's body, inches away from John Ramsey, so convinced the murderer was in the house with her that she claimed to have quietly counted the bullets in her holster just in case she had to use one. Spooky, spooky. Very, very strange stuff. She wasn't the only one that found his behaviour very odd. A detective on the scene had overheard John Ramsey make an arrangement for the family to fly out to Atlanta hours after the murder. There was also a lot of suspicion of sexual abuse that began to circulate, although there was no evidence ever found to prove allegations that there was any sexual abuse occurring. And Ramsey later went on to say that there is no history. A person doesn't just go throughout their lives as a normal human being one night and turn into a monster, slaughter their daughter, go to bed and act normal from there on. That just doesn't happen. Then the next suspect, obviously, of the family was the brother, Burke Ramsey. And, you know, all this time the parents said he was in bed the entire time. Patsy had tried to shield Jonbenet's brother Burke from the press for years and years and years after the murder, and he did a very recent strange interview with Dr. Phil, which he decided to make this decision that he was going to sort of clear the air and sort of clear his name, I think because he knew people did suspect him. He sort of was very creepy in this interview, and he grinned all the way through the questions about the murder, which was just very odd. So then soon after this, the two-part documentary that I've been chatting about on CBS aired, which was called The Case of Jonbenet Ramsey, and they basically tried to see if they could come up with any new leads as to who maybe had murdered Jonbenet. They did lean quite a lot of suspicion toward Burke. They set up a compelling theory. Famed forensic investigator Werner Spitz's review of Jonbenet's autopsy included a perfectly rectangular defect, which was where the suspected blow to the head had came from. And it was suspected that the blow actually came from a blunt, heavy flashlight that was seen in the photo on the kitchen counter in the crime scene photos. He claimed that the flashlight fitted the 8.5-inch gash on her skull to perfection. However, there was no trace evidence of either Jonbenet nor Burke found on the flashlight in their home, but When Spitz originally did his investigation, he actually asked the Ramsays if he could enter the Ramsays premises to, like, because sometimes when they're doing like autopsies and things, it's nice to see the crime scene to sort of put two and two together, and they refused his entry into the crime scene, which was very interesting. And the flashlight, when investigated, there was no evidence on it whatsoever. There was no fingerprints at all on either the flashlight or the batteries, which suggested that the item had been wiped down, which was very interesting. Like, someone's clearly touched that at some point, so why is there no evidence on it at all? The flashlight then became an even more suspicious sort of idea when they linked it to this scenario involving that bowl of pineapple that was found at the crime scene. That she had pineapple in her stomach, and in this picture of the crime scene there was clearly a bowl of pineapple on the worktop in the kitchen. They thought that Jonbenet had maybe taken a piece of fruit from Burke's late night snack, which was found on the dining room table, because the undigested piece of pineapple was inside of her tummy. This led him to strike her over the head with the flashlight out of anger, and the wounds on Jonbenet's back, previously assumed to have come from an encounter with a stun gun, were consistent with the edges of one of Burke's toy train tracks, which Spitz suggested may have been used to poke his sister's body for a response. Burke went on to file several lawsuits against the experts and the TV network. It was very interesting because there was a lot of things on that programme as well where they watched his like body language in interviews as a child afterward, and it was just odd. He didn't seem saddened by his sister's death, which was really strange. And it did also come out, one of the ex-friends of the couple, she recalled going around the house one day with her daughter, and Jonbenet had like a big gash under her eye. She asked Patsy what had happened, and Burke had actually struck Jonbenet in the face with a golf club. Strange. And the alternative theory was this intruder theory, and there was a lot of physical evidence to support it. There was a boot print found next to Jonbenet's body which did not belong to anyone in the family. There was also a broken window in the basement which was believed to be the most likely form of entry from the intruder, but like I say, this was later I think confirmed by John, that he'd actually broken the window on an occasion because he'd forgotten his keys. So it still could have been entry for the intruder, but they hadn't smashed the window in order to gain entry. It was already broken. And another interesting thing to note was what I'd mentioned earlier on, was this theory that when they actually looked into it, there was no physically possible way that an intruder could have exited that window without disturbing the debris around the windowsill, which it was found undisturbed. Now, there were some DNA blood drops from an unknown male on the underwear, and the floors in the Ramsey home were heavily carpeted, so it was plausible that someone could have quite easily have carried her from a room downstairs without anyone knowing. It could have been done like in a quiet manner. So there was several suspects that were thought about for this intruder theory. So the first was a guy called Bill McReynolds, who was known as the town Santa. Bill is now deceased, and he was a friend of the family who dressed up as Santa Claus the week before Jonbenet's murder to entertain the neighbourhood children. So while an older man dressed as Santa makes for a pretty good perp, and you would think he would fit the bill for like a sexualised child murder, the possibility that he was involved in her death is now very, very slim to none. McReynolds was rumoured to have paid a little too much attention to Jonbenet, going so far to as arrange a secret visit from Santa Claus at Christmas. So he'd supposedly chosen Jonbenet to be his special friend, and it was alleged that he'd gone so far as bringing a vial of glitter that had been gifted by Jonbenet to his heart surgery. He asked his wife to mix the gold glitter in with his ashes if he were to die. But his own daughter was kidnapped 22 years previous, and before the murder in 1974, his wife had actually written a play about a child being molested and then murdered in a basement. But I think these are all just coincidental things, and I think maybe his daughter being kidnapped, that's going to do some damage to someone, and maybe he just seen his own daughter in Jonbenet. So according to the Denver Post, Bill McReynolds felt close to Jonbenet. He said, quote, "Her murder was harder on me than my operation. She made a profound change in me," end quote. The particular story did create a lot of buzz, but it failed to amount to anything more than sensationalised character assassination of a friendly old man, which I honestly don't believe he had anything to do with it. I think it was just all blown out of proportion. People sometimes just want someone someone to be the murderer. Then the next suspect was a guy called Gary Olivier. He was known as the town drifter, and Gary was a known sex offender in Boulder, Colorado, when Jonbenet was found strangled to death in what looked like potential sexual assault. Convicted paedophile had been living in the area on and off, and the police allegedly found a magazine cutout of Jonbenet Ramsey in his backpack after he was apprehended on drugs charges in 2000. He explained why he had the photo. He said that Jonbenet's murder touched me very deeply. I felt she was an exceptional girl whose death was an exceptional loss. I felt the need to build a monument, a shrine to remember this little girl. He was soon released, but the suspicion remained. A friend of Gary Olivier's, Michael Vale, revealed to In Touch magazine that Gary called him on the day of the murder and said, quote, "I hurt a little girl, I hurt a little girl." So he revealed to him that he'd hurt a little girl in Boulder, Colorado, where obviously Jonbenet was found, but records show that there was no other girl reported to have been harmed that night in the area other than Jonbenet. Michael Vale also revealed that the strangulation method used on Jonbenet, Gary had actually used that on his own mother when he was a child. He tried to strangle his own mother with a telephone cord, and surprisingly, although everything seemed to fit, Gary's DNA just didn't. Gary is actually now serving a 10-year sentence for child abuse images, and he's been a long time suspect in the murder. Then in 2006, a guy came forward called John Mark Carr, and he was actually an ex-school teacher, and he confessed out of the blue to the strangulation of Jonbenet, and it was in graphic sexual detail. He was arrested in Thailand, where he'd been living after facing child pornography charges in the US. He basically fled to Thailand because he was in trouble in America. He started reaching out to a University of Colorado Boulder professor named Michael Tracy. He emailed him in regards to a documentary that Tracy was making on the case. Those emails then took a disturbing turn, revealing the grown man's sexual fascination with Jonbenet. Tracy then decided this is just not right, there's something going on here, I need to take these emails to the police. So he took them to the police, and he was arrested in Bangkok as a possible suspect. In his emails, Carr had used similar wording as the ransom note, and at one point he called Patsy Ramsey by her nickname Neddy. He would eventually write that he was in love with Jonbenet and confessed to hitting her in the head with a flashlight. He was immediately flown to Boulder for questioning, but it was clear because his DNA did not match the profile. John's demented confession involved a series of diary entries allegedly written from the scene of the crime. In one dramatic account, he recalls strangling Jonbenet in a love game which went wrong. Carr's alleged involvement broke headlines, and this basically set off this massive media fiasco. However, he was dismissed as a suspect and written off as a paedophile who just wanted fame and notoriety. Officials also failed to verify that he was ever in Boulder at the time. The one-time suspect is now living with a new identity. Why would you want to confess to a murder like this? I just don't understand. Now, the next suspect is a lady known as Linda Hoffman Pugh, and she was actually the housekeeper. She'd worked for the family as a housekeeper, and her husband was a handyman, so it wasn't surprising that she carried a key to the home. So during the investigation, they began to realise she didn't really fit the murderer that they were after. Obviously, they were looking more for a white male, a former convict, possibly 25 years to 30. She didn't hold back on voicing who she thought had killed or accidentally killed Jonbenet. She did voice her opinions that Patsy had murdered Jonbenet by an accident. Patsy then went on to tell investigators that Linda, the housekeeper, was struggling for money, and she'd asked them for several thousands of dollars in a loan, which Patsy declined. The police showed up at Pugh's home the night after the murder and asked the 57-year-old housekeeper to write out the number £180,000 on a piece of paper, and reportedly took her fingerprints and several strands of hair. She then testified in front of a grand jury for a total of 8 hours, including a statement against Patsy that read, "I think she had multiple personalities. She'd be in a good mood and then she'd be cranky. She got into arguments with Jonbenet about wearing a dress or about a friend coming over. I'd never seen Patsy so upset." Patsy's looking more and more suspicious. So this theory was that the housekeeper Linda had led Jonbenet down into the basement because obviously Jonbenet trusted her. She followed, and she'd tried to trick her employees into leaving money for ransom. You know, this lady's in the house quite often. It's possible that she could have seen John's payslip and knew that he was due or had this bonus for 118,000. So also she knew the home, she was familiar with the home and the family schedule. She made a convenient suspect, but I think that was about it. She didn't have an alibi, which was quite interesting because she was asleep in bed while her husband allegedly slept on the couch. There was room to speculate she could have been involved, but so far all of the evidence implicating her in the case is circumstantial at best, and she never got formally accused of the crime. So then another potential suspect was a man called Michael Helgoth, who was the electrician. He also worked in a nearby auto salvage yard. Michael was referred to as a hellraiser because he'd allegedly been tied to a property dispute involving the Ramsays. So could he have used this as a possible motivation to serve revenge on the Ramsays by kidnapping their daughter, and it was a kidnapping gone wrong? It was speculated Michael caught wind of the fact that he was a possible suspect because they did actually find a boot print outside the home that matched a pair of boots that he owned. He actually committed suicide before anyone could get to him. His death occurred 2 days after a 1997 press conference announcing that the Boulder DA was zeroing in on a new suspect. However, Helgoth remains cleared by DNA, and a lot of the recent investigation actually revolves around the DNA profiles being developed from the sample found in her underwear and the touch DNA that was later developed from her long johns. The profile was entered into Codis in 2003, which is like a national DNA database. Anyone who's been in trouble with the police, their data is normally stored on this database, and there was no match found. So in 2016, Boulder District Attorney Mary Lacey took over the case. She did agree with the federal prosecutor that the intruder theory was more plausible than the Ramsays murdering their own daughter. So under Lacey's lead, they actually developed a DNA profile from the touch DNA left behind by skin cells on the long johns, and in 2008 she released a statement actually fully exonerating the family, saying in part, "The Boulder District Attorney's Office does not consider any member of the Ramsey family, including John, Patsy or Burke Ramsey, as suspects in this case." Even though the public do still believe that the family had some sort of an involvement in the murder, there's a lot of people who believe that one or more of the Ramsays, including her mother, father or brother, were responsible for the brutal homicide. And in 2010 the case was officially renewed with focus on the DNA samples. Further testing has been conducted on these samples, and experts now believe that the sample is actually from 2 individuals rather than 1. In 2016 it was announced that the DNA would be sent to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation to be tested with modern methods. DNA expert actually studied the DNA, and he concluded that Jonbenet's underwear may have held DNA from the manufacturing process of the pants, because they actually did a test when they proved this on an unopened bag of underwear. The unopened bag of underwear actually tested positive for DNA from the factory workers. The CBS programme concluded that the crime scene DNA was fallacious, meaning that any of the listed suspects could have possibly been the killer. So I just think with this one it's so difficult because I think there's that many mistakes and things being made throughout the case. I don't think they're ever going to manage to find who this killer is because there's not enough evidence to zero in on one person. So there was a programme that they actually did called Casting Jonbenet Ramsey. They were like trying to cast actors to like do reenactments of what had happened that night, and a few of the residents interviewed suggesting that local paedophiles living in Boulder or the surrounding area may have been behind the infamous killing. And one of them says that there was a lot of talk about a child porn ring going on in Boulder, and another one says that one of the types of criminality in the area, what you find is a lot of white collar crime, and possibly the child porn angle with everybody was just like, why isn't this being investigated? And another says it's always somebody you know. 9 times out of 10 it's always somebody you know. Mark Beckner, the former Boulder police chief, actually went on to say that there were loads and loads of mistakes in the handling of the Jonbenet Ramsey case. And first off, police officers should have shut the crime scene down immediately and taken statements off Jonbenet's parents. Since the crime happened on Christmas Day, there were fewer, like around Christmas time, there were fewer people available and they were sort of overworked and understaffed. The former police chief did say that the girl's parents seemed to show an unusual behaviour, but clarified that this could have been due to a number of reasons. He also noted that multiple parts of the crime did appear odd to investigators, including the lengthy 2.5-page ransom note, and he also said that they believed the note was written after the murder and that there was never an intent to kidnap the girl. He also believes that the case was always a murder staged to look like a botched kidnapping. So in the end, no one knows what truly happened to Jonbenet Ramsey. The odd details of this case will forever cloud the truth, and the case is tragically unsolved, and I do think that this one will probably remain unsolved for maybe forever. I do think this is such a sad case, and my personal opinion, I know the parents have been exonerated, but there's something about me that this screams an inside job. I don't necessarily think that it was purposefully done. I do think it could have just been something that happened and it was an accident, and then they scrambled to cover it up with this whole kidnapping angle, and it did work in their favour because they didn't immediately look for a body, so the scene was completely trampled and evidence was destroyed. I just think with this one we will never ever know the truth. I just find it strange how there's this whole kidnapping angle, yet the body was never taken off the premises and she was murdered before I definitely think the ransom note was written to cover up something, and I do think the ransom note did come from inside the house. Very strange. I'd love to know what your thoughts on this case are. I do feel like it's an inside job. I'm gonna say it, I do feel like it was an inside job. Let me know what your thoughts and feelings are on this case down below. Let me know who do you think did it? Let me know, was it any of the suspects listed, or was it someone who's just never yet been caught? I think with the whole DNA sort of thing with this one and the lack of evidence, I don't think they'll ever prove this one. Anyway guys, that's it for this week's True Crime Tuesday, and I shall see you in the next one. Mwah. Thanks for watching.